It's time for the final word in sports all across the state. You're listening to Sports Talk with your hosts, Phil Kornbluth, Will Pelagic, and the Professor Tom Hayes. You've been waiting all day. So join the show now by calling 800-956-7266.
And a pleasant good evening to you and yours, and welcome into Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network for a Friday evening edition, the 11th day of January 2019. Will Pelagic, along with Professor Tom Hayes, producer Brian Leonard. The Corn is off today. He's taking care of some family obligations this weekend in the Windy City. We'll keep you entertained, though, as we continue here on a very busy Friday. And really, we're getting some breaking news just basically into our newsroom within the last couple of minutes. It looked like South Carolina's game against Missouri for a bit was going to be up in the air with regards to some travel issues with the Missouri basketball team. And basically, it went from being up in the air to completely canceled, or at least postponed as of right now, because of the snow that is taking place currently in the Missouri area. They're actually showing on SportsCenter right now. Look at Kansas City, where it is snowing there. It's supposed to snow in the mid-Missouri region about 8 inches. St. Louis is supposed to get about a foot this weekend here on Friday night going into Saturday. And basically, from the standpoint of where things are, in fact, plane actually slid off the runway at Columbia Regional Airport today. No one was hurt, thank goodness. But as a result of that, South Carolina, who had been hot coming in, Professor, 2-0, going into a potential third victory to begin Southeastern Conference play, now we'll have to wait and see what the SEC says about rescheduling this game with Missouri.
Yeah, they thought about maybe doing it on Sunday. You know, I hate to say this because people think I'm sort of weird, but the first thing I thought about is if you're Missouri and you're struggling right now, I would make by any means necessary to get to Columbia because the first thing I thought of was Michigan last year.
Right.
Remember, Michigan made that run in the NCAA tournament because their plane ran off the runway and everybody freaked out, and it was almost like they figured it out.
Right.
You know, basketball is really not that important. So let's just go out here loosey-goosey and see if we can win a few games. And they ended up, weren't they in the Final Four last year?
They were.
In the championship game, I believe. So I thought that Missouri were going to try to make it tomorrow so they could play in this game. Maybe that shook them up.
Yeah, you mentioned Sunday being a possible scenario, but at least right now that's not being talked about. Trying to find at least a common off weekend or an off day to try and at least turn things at least in that direction. It's going to cause a condensed week for one of these two teams, if not both. And right now, again, this is probably the worst time for South Carolina to have a postponed game just because of the fact that their momentum right now is such that they've been playing very well. And like you said, Missouri scuffling right now, it might even be a welcome thing for them. So right now, for those who were planning on being part of that big crowd at Colonial Life Arena, that is currently on hold. South Carolina was at least slated to play Missouri, but now no longer the case. We'll continue to keep you updated on that. We're going to hear from Colin Taylor of Gamecock Central, who's been kind of back and forth with the officials over there at Gamecock Land, and he'll give us at least an update on what he has from the table there coming up in about a half an hour's time. We're going to hear tonight also in our second hour from Wofford men's basketball coach Mike Young. Wofford a big victory over UNC Greensboro last night, continuing good play to start SoCon play for them. A new Clemson book is out from our friend Zach Lentz of the Times Democrat. It's called The Journey to the Top, chronicles Clemson's second national championship. We just got the news in as well from the folks at Clemson that the football team will travel Monday to the White House to be honored for their national championship. They'll be received by President Donald Trump, despite the government shutdown. Of course, the Tigers made the trip as a team in 2017 when they won that year's game as well, the 2016 season's national championship. We were talking yesterday about Cleveland Ferrell, the defensive end from Clemson Pro, and you know, it's weird. We were talking about maybe he's kind of wavering. We haven't really heard from him. He was kind of the last guy on the fence about possibly coming in or going out as far as whether he was going to stay with the team, and made the announcement late last night that he's going to go despite the culture. What about the culture? Despite the culture and everything, he gets 2 national championships and he ends his career with a win.
Well, you know, part of that culture is the fact that some of these kids, when they go into Clemson, they see the portraits at their various facilities of guys who made it big in the NFL. So actually, graduating from that football team and getting your degree and leaving Clemson and going to the National Football League actually adds to that culture.
True.
One of the things that freaked me out, I was thinking about this when we had to call it, was the fact that you can sit down there, Mr. Farrell. Yes, I see you're here for a home loan. Yes. You have any collateral? I have the Clemson culture right here. I don't think that spins very well.
Right.
And let's face it. The reason people actually should be going to college is to gain knowledge and get experiences that makes them, work worthy for the real world. And that's what Clemson has done. The guy has a degree. Now, he's got a championship, and he's ready to move forward.
Isn't the goal of college to give you the ability to make a living in a sport? And once you are able to make a living, or whatever trade that you're trying to make from your collegiate studies, if you go to college to get the ability and the tools to be able to have you earn money in a trade, and once you're able to make money in that trade, why are we disparaging people for doing that? That doesn't make any sense to me. That to me is what I've always thought from that perspective. But again, people like to talk about the culture. And if you ask, whether it's Sweeney, whether it's Muschamp, the greatest recruiting tool for them
is a guy in the NFL.
Is to see is to be able to point on a Sunday when they have a recruit in and say, "Hey, you see that guy that wears number 99, who's probably going to sack for the New York Jets? Guess what he's doing? He's playing in the National Football League. He came here." So, I don't understand that. But again, that to me, you and I are on the same page there. And that caller yesterday
it's the best advertisement for a football team to have their guys move to the next level.
And he's certainly accomplished a lot, and really one of the best spokespeople for Clemson's football program. Will be heading to the next level. Really, the only guy that we've not heard from that is apparently trying to test the waters is safety Tanner Muse. Remember his counterpart Kayvon Wallace has already said that he's coming back to Clemson. We've been hearing some inner workings through a source that Muse might actually be thinking about going to the league, which would be kind of curious. I'm wondering where exactly his spot is in the league, whether it's at strong safety, whether it's an outside linebacker. I don't know if he's big enough. He might be one of these guys that is someone without a position, because as we've talked about with him, pass coverage is an issue. Run coverage, not an issue. He's a great run stuffing guy, but pass coverage has been an issue.
Yeah, linebacker is a projected. That's why I was thinking that it's very tough. It's not rare, but it's tough for a guy to be projected to a different position during the draft, because you usually downgraded when you're a projected guy. Well, he played quarterback in college, but he looks like a safety.
Right.
That downgrades you. Here's a guy that has functional coverage ability in the middle of the field. He looks like an inside linebacker in a 3-4. But you would think that if he did return to Clemson, he would talk about, can y'all use me at an inside linebacker?
Right.
So he would have that experience before he decided to turn to the league.
Well, we've already talked at great length about the fact that Clemson, while this year had not issues with depth, but they were having to almost cultivate new depth in the secondary, they really took care of that in the recruiting trail this year. They have about 4 or 5 different safeties who they brought in as recruits. That's something that's very, very big for their future, and at least their immediate future. So maybe because of that, there's at least some movement there, maybe with Muse, just because, again, he is so, I wouldn't call it deficient, but just not proficient in that area. We'd love to hear from you on this Friday as well. 800-956-7266. You want to react to the Gamecocks basketball game with Missouri being postponed. We've already gotten some snide comments toward my mater for not preparing well enough to get themselves out of Columbia West, or Columbia Midwest, if you will. We'll talk more about what's going on with the Gamecock coaching staff. Lance Thompson apparently on the way out. We have some names that could surface that we've been talking about. And could Charleston Southern's head coach be in the offing? We have a name that might surface, and give you that when we come back here on Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network.
Sports Talk is the sports talk show of Main Street, South Carolina. From the coast to the mountains, we cover it all.
Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network. So another weird chapter to the Mayor's Cup rivalry. We have, the very close football games that they've played, the Connor Shaw game, the situation that took place with the storm earlier this year that took place with the lightning delay. Obviously the stuff with Dawn Staley and Jim Sturk. And now this, Gamecocks in Missouri, postponed because Missouri didn't figure out how to leave on time. And again, I don't mean to belittle this because, again, they want to be safe and they want to make sure that everything happens safely. I'm not trying to be flippant about this, but it does seem weird when I've talked to people who are coming down here for the game, who are reporters or whatever. They figured out a way to get out. I don't know if they came and left out of St. Louis, but I know one guy in particular, Dave Matter of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, is literally filing all this stuff while he's in the air on his laptop using the internet on the plane there. So from that perspective, it's like, really? They couldn't figure out a way to get out?
You tell the pilot, can he turn this thing around? We don't have a job to do when we get to the other Columbia.
Meanwhile, right now, speaking of things being in flux and involving the Gamecocks, they have some bigger fish to fry right now. It seems that we've already, without anything, at least including the death certificate, basically ended the Gamecock coaching career of Lance Thompson. South Carolina's defensive line, really defensive tackles coach, has been all but basically termed as no longer with the program. Multiple media outlets have reported his demise and ouster, and the continued speculation now surrounds his potential replacement. The guy who seems to be, at least around most parts, the consensus choice is Marion Hobby, the former defensive line coach with Clemson, and of course, up until last season was defensive line coach with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's the one name that basically amongst the insiders continues to be popping up. And according to the Big Spur, Tony Morrell wrote today that he continues to be at least somebody in Muschamp's eye, said that he's had contact with him and remains interested. But the thing is, Hobby, being in the NFL, it's hard to lure an NFL guy back to college. There could be some professional jobs that he could be in the works for, and obviously that would be a better thing for him, not having necessarily to recruit. But who knows? We'll see if they can lure Hobby. Another one that is kind of in the offing there with the Gamecocks is John Scott Jr. That was another name that Morrell brought up. He, of course, has NFL and college experience. He's currently the defensive line coach at Arkansas.
Went to high school in Greer.
Absolutely. He has South Carolina ties to this area. But the one thing, too, from the standpoint of where South Carolina sits, I know people think that these things are, I don't want to say quick fixes, but because of that, they're just from the standpoint of where they sit. I just don't understand exactly what you get from one guy versus the other, especially if you're going and talking about a guy who is currently in the league. I know that he has a great tenure from his time at Clemson, but, what do you get from this guy that you aren't already getting from Lance?
I don't know. Maybe you see that they have a better record as far as recruiting is concerned. Does this line just need a different voice, or they're looking for somebody who may have specialty in a certain area, like use of hands or more exotic ways to run stunts? You don't know. Somebody has to have something, but it has to be connections also.
Right.
And once you see Marion Hobby, I think he's another guy from Georgia. They're going to flood guys from Georgia to go into that state and try to siphon off as much talent as they can. But, it's interesting that when you go to most of Georgia, football players will tell you, I love Georgia. I love Georgia. But Atlanta is a different fish.
Yeah.
The players there are not that, as in love with Georgia as the players outside of Atlanta.
Right.
Some people will say, Atlanta is this different, this island, and then you have this state around it called Georgia.
Right.
So this I-20 connection that South Carolina has had for a while has worked, and they want to siphon off as much as they can, I think, out of that Atlanta area.
Well, again, the thing about the reason the Thomas Brown situation worked out, and again, we are actually going to hear, well, we were supposed to actually hear from Thomas Brown tomorrow at the Gamecock men's basketball game that now no longer happens. Of course, Hobby had a 3-year tenure as a player with the Vikings and Patriots. He does bring instant credibility. Of course, we mentioned the fact that he's had 2 stints at Clemson, also was in the league with the Saints, and also was at Tennessee and Ole Miss and Duke. So he's a well-traveled guy. I'm not throwing anything on his credentials or anything like that. He's very much a well-tenured guy. Again, I want to figure out where the appetite is from Gamecock fans. Like the defensive line is far from the issue right now from where the Gamecocks sit right now. They got Zach Pickens, okay? Like let's not mince words here. Javon Kinlaw has been a sensation. Rick Sandage has been great. J.J. Nigbari has been great. Defensive line isn't the reason why South Carolina hasn't had the success they've wanted defensively or just overall. The positions of weakness for the South Carolina this past year were threefold: special teams, running back, and linebacker. They addressed one of those with the addition of Thomas Brown. I don't know what you can do about special teams other than, maybe have some better luck go your way from that perspective. I don't know if replacing Coleman Hutzler would have been on the table or something like that, because he's also an outside linebackers coach. Who knows? But I mean, that's the guy I'd be looking at from my perspective. If I was sitting here as a Gamecock fan, I'd say, you know what? I don't like this guy. But for some reason, Lance Thompson's become a pariah with Gamecock fans.
Well, you got to remember that anytime, and this is true for any football team, I'm just not going to pick on Gamecock fans. There has to be a villain.
Yeah.
And Lance Thompson is the villain. Plus, Lance Thompson, Phil is right. Lance Thompson usually likes to not wear out his welcome. So I think his shelf life at his longest tenure may have been about 4 years.
Speaking about someone who could be on the way out, Javon Charleston has at least surfaced in the transfer portal. Multiple media outlets reporting that he is there. He joins Corey Banks and Shamik Blackshear in there as Gamecock players who are testing the waters. Blackshear has already announced that he's no longer going to come back to the program. Just because you're in this transfer portal does not necessarily mean that you are going to leave, but it just makes you eligible to be contacted by other teams. He has 1 year of eligibility left, and that's one I think that's rather curious, Pro, because of what happened with his legal situation at the beginning of the year. I mean, maybe he's looking for a fresh start, but I mean, Will Muschamp stuck his neck out for this guy and kept him on the team. And from that perspective, I almost wonder, it's like this doesn't seem like it really is. It doesn't pass the smell test for me.
Well, they may want to use his scholarship. Who knows? And he may want to go back to Big Ten country. He's an Illinois kid. Who knows? We'll see about that. But this transfer portal, I mean, who came up with this term? Some a Star Trek fan or whatever. You go into the portal,
Skynet,
and they you still Scotty to Energize, and you go to a school. But this is interesting how this has worked out, because we have so many coaches in college. You just mentioned one that South Carolina is looking at, Marion Hobby, who's been in the college and NFL.
Right.
And let's face it, both institutions, as far as athletics are concerned, are morphing into each other. You're seeing more of these RPOs at the NFL that came out of college, and now college has its own waiver wire called the transfer portal. You might as well call it what it is. It's almost like, this is the flea market where you pick up a player with experience that you want to use for a year or two.
Meanwhile, Charleston Southern could have centered around its head coach. One of the 3 candidates who was mentioned by the Charleston Post and Courier as having interviewed was Joshua Ergel, who was the offensive line coach with the Governors of Austin Peay. He tweeted out today basically a departure letter saying that he's no longer going to be at Austin Peay. So that could at least dictate, at least outwardly, that he could be on his way to Charleston Southern, the Goose Creek area, to try and become the new head coach of Charleston Southern, the Buccaneers. They would say that they could be having an announcement as soon as Saturday. It might be Ergel, it might not be, remains to be seen. We'll talk about the Gamecock basketball postponement, and other Gamecock notes with Colin Taylor of Gamecock Central next. Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network. We continue here on a Friday. A couple of tweets in regarding what we were talking about earlier. Someone goes, defensive line not an issue at South Carolina. 3 words, no pass rush. First of all, that's not his department. Defensive tackle was his department. You very rarely, if anything, get that kind of pass rush instead of like all pro guys like Warren Sapp. Those guys give you a pass rush. And like you mentioned to me during the break, the ball's out in 3 seconds.
Yeah, you got to remember that before the season even started, and what I mean by that is the first game, potentially, and also experience-wise, your best pass rusher got hurt.
Right.
I mean, that's one of the things.
And he
that
wasn't even a defensive tackle too. It was obviously DJ Wanham. This guy goes Marion Hobby's a better recruiter than Lance Thompson. We don't really know that, but and we don't even know if the guy is Marion Hobby. So for that perspective too, that's remains to be seen. We now talk on the guest line with our friend Colin Taylor, Gamecock Central. He joins us here on Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network. And Colin, the news of the moment involves Gamecock basketball and the postponement of Saturday's game against Missouri. What more can you tell us about that and the discussions that are going on about the possible rescheduling of such?
Well, I mean, it all happened pretty quick. I mean, it was the news started to leak a little bit after 5 o'clock that Missouri hadn't left yet for this Columbia, and the snow that was supposed to hit that section of the area or that section of the country was preventing a lot of that. And then by 5:45, that game got postponed. I know that university officials were in discussions to see if Sunday was a potential reschedule opportunity, but I haven't heard anything more about that. I know that was certainly on the table. A lot of that obviously has to do with player safety and if they'll be able to get back to Missouri after the game or if they'll be able to leave in general with all the snow that's expected. I think they're expecting to get about 8 inches of snow over the next 36 hours. So already some nasty weather out there and not much more on the rescheduling front other than I know Sunday was an option at the time and they were still discussing that last I heard.
Colin, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if they still do it, but if you can recall, there used to be 1 week, I think, out of the basketball schedule in the SEC where you had pretty much, 5 or 6 days in between games. Have they gone that far to discuss that? Who has that open area or open week that they can fit a game into that window?
I don't think that there's a big break at the moment. The break that they used to have, I think, got filled up by the SEC Big 12 Challenge.
Right.
Okay.
So South Carolina will take that Saturday. They don't play. They play Auburn on January 22nd and then Tennessee on January 29th. But in between that, they have that game at Oklahoma State.
Yeah, I'm looking right now just casually at the two schedules. It doesn't seem like there is a common weekend or a common day that they don't necessarily have off. So it'd be very, very difficult to try and get this game in unless they basically condense a particular week. And, of course, they also have the return engagement, which they play on the 2nd of March back in the other Columbia. Colin Taylor, Gamecock Central. Just from the standpoint of where they sit right now, I mean, this, I think, hurts the Gamecocks more than it does Missouri just because you were playing Missouri at a pretty ripe time where they were dealing with some offensive inefficiency. And also from the standpoint of South Carolina, they were riding high off that victory over Mississippi State. How do you surmise right now that this affects the Gamecocks going into a game against Vanderbilt, which you might think is sure a win, but because of the fact that is a weird place to play, it might not necessarily be a slam dunk, pardon the pun.
Right, and you got to think that this is, I would say, a little bit of a disadvantage for South Carolina because they were playing so well, especially coming off 2 really big wins in the SEC, and I thought they matched up really well with Missouri. Missouri wasn't having, I guess, the season they were expecting to, and you know they've been middle of the road in a lot of different efficiency statistics so far this season. And, you know, now they more than likely will go in and have about a week off, a little bit over a week. They play on Wednesday to just kind of, I guess, accumulate rust and not have any kind of game speed experience. So, and like you said, Vanderbilt's a very weird, very odd place to play. And Vanderbilt's had some injuries, but they're an uber talented team that has a lot of, freshman talent on it. Aaron Neesmith played at Porter Gaud down in Charleston. He's there now. So it'll be interesting to watch. And, I'm curious to see it as to how Frank Martin handles practice without a game on Saturday now.
Well, one of the things you look at is because I guess coaches at this level get paid the big bucks because there's always something to worry about. 2 things for South Carolina at this point. As well as they're playing, they're almost down to what we would call a tournament core, where you narrow your roster down to 8 players who will play the bulk of the minutes. Henson is back and he's getting some time, but they need to get some players back because let's face it, not only as the schedule goes on, some of those players are going to wear out, but every college team has those freshmen. When they hit into February, they hit what they call the freshman wall, and South Carolina has to look forward to some of that headache if they can't get Mania back in time.
Right. I think anytime with freshmen, you're looking to get into a routine. Especially, I was a freshman in college once too, and you lean on your different routines that you have. You used to practice at this time, class at this time, then a game on Tuesday, and then doing the same thing day by day, week by week. That something like this, where a game, the rug gets pulled out from under your feet in less than 24 hours before you're supposed to play a game, it can be jarring. It could be, and it'll be interesting to see how the freshmen respond if their clock and their routine gets thrown into a loop, or how they do that. So that's definitely something I'm going to keep an eye on. And we're hitting that, and you saw it against Florida and Mississippi State, that the freshmen had their moments where they were really good, and then they had their moments where, they didn't play as well. And I think that right now USC is just trying to get some form of consistency out of their freshmen. They've shown glimpses of being really good, but now is the point where they got to start being a little bit more consistent as they enter the bulk of SEC play.
And one of those guys they will not have for the rest of the season is TJ Moss. Found out last night on Carolina Calls that he will not be available, and got the official release from South Carolina today. We have not gotten an official release about the fact that Lance Thompson is no longer with the Gamecocks, and everybody seems to think that it's a foregone conclusion that he is gone. I know that we still are trying to figure out who might be that next man in that position, but between that and the Thomas Brown situation, big picture, Colin, what does this tell you about where Will Muschamp feels, or how he feels about his staff right now with all this fluctuating and moving around right now with his staff?
I think that Will Muschamp is going to try and seize any opportunity he can to, if he sees that there can be an upgrade at a position coach or whatever, defensive line, running back, wherever, he's going to take that and try to get any kind of advantage in terms of recruiting, in terms of football know-how that he can get. I mean, you saw that, and shifting Bobby Bentley over to working with the tight ends and bringing in a Thomas Brown, who obviously has recruited and coached a lot of great running backs. Then I think you're going to see that with whoever they bring in on the defensive line as well, in terms of recruiting prowess and things like that. But I think that recruiting is the name of the game. Will Muschamp has mentioned that time in and time out, about getting guys and being able to develop them and developing quality depth. So I think that recruiting is the number one thing that he's looking for, along with being able to develop guys and coach them up pretty well.
Like, we have about 30 seconds left. Did you think that defensive line was a big problem for them last year?
I think injuries obviously played a pretty big role in it when you lose guys like Javon Kinlaw for pieces here. But I think that it's a line that has a lot of potential, but it still hasn't been reached yet. You look at a guy like Kinlaw, who played well but played inconsistent, and I think it has room to grow, and I think they're going to do that next year with the addition of some of the other pieces they're bringing in, some of the other things that they're going to do.
I don't know if a new coach is going to keep Javon Kinlaw from taking plays off. I mean, that's not necessarily – that's something that's beyond a coach's control.
Well, a key point to be made is a guy that big, they take plays off. Okay. I'm sorry.
They do.
They have to.
Colin, great stuff as always, man. Thanks so much for the time, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Well, thanks for having me.
That's Colin Taylor, Gamecock Central, joining us here on Sports Talk. More on this and also some recruiting notes as well. We continue on Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network.
Now back to Sports Talk, South Carolina's most listened to sports talk show for more than 30 years.
Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network. Looking here a little bit as well, 800-956-7266. So basically tomorrow in the state, that really knocks down a big, with the Gamecock game no longer being put in. And again, people are asking us about whether or not Missouri would have left early. Again, I said earlier today, there was a plane that ran off the runway at Columbia, Missouri's airport. So I'm thinking they were probably trying to wait out any potential scenario where maybe they could bus them to St. Louis or somewhere else and trying to make that happen. But again, safety was the foremost reason, and for the players, safety of the players was the foremost reason why they decided to not or basically punt on travel to come here to Columbia, South Carolina. Both teams still working with the SEC to try and figure out a rescheduled date.
And of course, you got to remember that Missouri historically has been in the Big 12. And because they played in games like in Nebraska, but especially in Colorado, they've had a history of some problems with some planes in their previous conference. So that's another reason you kind of lean on the safety.
You are not wrong there. Oklahoma State had one really unfortunate incident that took place in their basketball team's history that something that they do not want to relive. Other games of note Saturday involving state teams. Winthrop hosting High Point Saturday. USC Upstate is at Gardner-Webb. Texas Arlington is at Coastal Carolina, and Sunbelt play. Presbyterian at Wofford. Citadel hosting Western Carolina. Charleston Southern's at Longwood. The College of Charleston Cougars hosting Delaware. UNC Greensboro has Furman. Greensboro is the team that lost last night to Wofford. Wofford is at VMI. South Carolina State is at Morgan State. And speaking of the Terriers, we'll talk with Wofford head basketball coach Mike Young in our next segment to kick off our number 2. A little bit more, I guess, on this Clemson thing, just because I want to look at the depth chart, just kind of where things sit for Clemson with all these, basically all these things involving their depth and really from the standpoint of where they sit from a defensive standpoint. Really, most of the offensive contributors are back. So from that perspective, outside of Mitch Hyatt and Falsinelli, everything else is back for them. But from the standpoint of where they are defensively, you lose Furl, Wilkins, Huggins, Bryant, Lamar, Joseph, and maybe Muse, and also Mullins. So that's basically they're losing all but Isaiah Simmons, A.J. Terrell, and Kayvon Wallace, and maybe Muse. So those are 3 guys. You return 3 starters on defense of the basically defense that allowed only 16 points to Alabama. But you do have Xavier Thomas, Justin Foster, Xavier Kelly at defensive tackle. Logan Rudolph is somebody who was a big contributor on the defensive line. And, of course, we're talking about Jordan Williams and Niles Pinckney as guys who will fill in inside. The Davis twins are gone also as key contributors. You bring back a guy like a Jamie Skowski, as Shaq Smith, and even Jalen Williams, somebody who was a big contributor. He no longer is in the fold. He's a senior. Balin Spector played some time as well at linebacker. No more Mark Fields as well at corner. Mario Goodrich is going to have to take in some more time. Same with Kyler McMichael. Denzel Johnson moves in possibly to maybe be the guy who replaces Tanner Muse. We're going to see a lot of new names on the Clemson defense. And this is a team that admittedly this year played a lot of guys. They used their entire travel roster, I believe, in all but 2 of their conference games, at least from the standpoint of their road games. I think Boston College might have been the only one they didn't use their whole travel roster in. But from the standpoint of where they sit, that is a hefty. People who are talking about Clemson being this mammoth power next year, be careful, because next year is going to be one where you look at all these things and you think, oh, my goodness, this could be a little bit difficult.
Well, the one key thing you got to remember with Clemson, though, and the one intangible, and I don't mean sarcastic when I say this, is the culture. The guys are used.
The culture.
The guys are used to winning. When you start to win, it's almost like you forget how to lose. You make plays when you know the game is on the line, and when you have to make the big play, you do it that way. But I think Clemson is the point now where I think that no team actually does not have a weakness. You just have the eraser to cover up the weakness. Because when you look at it, when Florida State used to have strong defenses, they bring in a young quarterback and Bobby Bowden would say, look, throw as many interceptions as you want to because we got the defense to stop people.
Right.
Then when those defensive guys graduate, look, you're a seasoned veteran. Let's go to work. We need to score 40 a game to protect this defense.
800-956-7266. We've been talking Gamecocks and Clemson all day. We want to hear from you. Hank in Columbia is with us. What's up, Hank? How are you on this Friday?
I'm doing good. I was calling. You were mentioning about the defensive line coach, and those, when you hear a lot of college coaches talk, they say, your best coaches have to be your D line and your O line coach, and then you have your O coordinator and your defense coordinator, and everybody else recruits.
Mm-hmm.
And even with Clemson, let's take Carolina. When Loring was there, before the Clownies and all that got there, Loring was putting together very good lines when he was teaching with the Lottie Adja boys and teaching in Norwood, the guys he had in the box before he got the talent, which also he taught really well when he got in there. And that got the defense moving. And Hobby was kind of the same thing. Clemson, before Hobby and those guys came in there, had a decent line, but when they were trying to make that next step, they brought in him, and that's when they started to run a very good D line. So I think, and our D line really suffered when Loring left with some of the same cast of characters.
With number 7 left too.
You have to have. I think the D line coach can make a difference, and sometimes it's about perspective. Sometimes you can have a decent coach, but after a couple of years, you can see that there's a not a great chemistry between that coach and some of the other defensive coaches,
Right.
And sometimes that's why those things you have to move on.
I understand that, Hank, and I appreciate the call. Again, I'm not going to try and sit here and try to re-adjudicate, the Gamecocks' last couple of years under Lance Thompson. But if you're looking at the 3 units, I would say that defensive line, out of the 3, was probably the most solid over the 3-year period. I think last year there was some very deep deficiencies with the Gamecock secondary. Jamarcus King got beat like a drum so many times the last year, and even Chris Lamons had his struggles. Somebody who ended up in the league had his struggles in the secondary. They were able to shore a lot of that up despite the injuries. You had guys like Israel Mukwamu really make big strides. J.C. Horn is somebody who projects very, very highly for the Gamecock future despite having injuries. And Rashad Fenton was somebody who, again, he's departing. But, again, I never looked at the secondary, independent of the injuries, as something that was a weakness this past year, other than the fact that they had to use guys who they weren't necessarily needing to use or wanting to use. Mm-hmm. The defensive line also was ravaged by injuries. But again, I would not look at that position and say it was one that was deficient. That's just my only thing.
Again, there's so many things about coaching that we don't know about.
Right.
And as I told you before with the previous offensive coordinator, sometimes the problem is not on the field.
Right.
It's in the meeting room.
Right. That's what I'm saying. There has to be something more to this.
So it's
this negativity toward Thompson. There must be something that we don't know that's happening behind the scenes, or that happened behind the scenes.
He's just the flavor of the month. I'm sorry. They'll find somebody.
Again, for the same reason, I don't know what the heck happened. Why Pat Washington drew the ire of Gamecock fans, but I know the reason that they did that was just because he was the odd man out. They wanted to keep Bentley on staff, and then they could hire Thomas Brown, and Washington ended up being collateral damage there. But from the standpoint, again, of Thompson, again, like I said, he's become a pariah for reasons that have not been, at least to me, made ultimately clear. Hope you enjoyed the opening hour of the program. We will continue. We're going to talk second hour about the brand new Clemson book from Zach Lentz called The Journey to the Top. We're going to continue to look at Clemson and South Carolina's depth chart, and we'll try to at least nail down some potential contingencies for South Carolina's postponed men's basketball game against Missouri. Also, Clemson's game this weekend against Virginia. We've barely talked Clemson hoops over the last week. They need a win in the worst way, and they don't necessarily have a big recipe to come in and have that with a Virginia team who comes in very, very salty and stingy. They didn't look very good up at the JPJ last year. We'll talk all about all that, and Wofford basketball coach Mike Young kicks off hour 2 next on Sports Talk.
Round 2 of Sports Talk up next with your hosts Phil Kornblut, Will Pelagic, and the Professor Tom Hayes. Don't leave us hanging. Join the show, 800-956-7266.
Sports Talk South Carolina Radio Network as we continue on a Friday. Will Pelagic and Professor Tom Hayes here with you. Phil Kornblut off today. He'll be back with us on Monday. He's taking care of some family business up in Chicago, but we'll continue to keep you entertained. If you're just joining us, South Carolina's men's basketball game scheduled for tomorrow against Missouri has been postponed to a later date that we do not know of quite yet. Missouri had problems getting out of Columbia, Missouri to come to Columbia, South Carolina because of snow in the mid-Missouri region. They're getting about 8 inches over the next 36 hours, and they were not able to get their plane up off the ground in time before the deluge. So instead, they are looking with the SEC to try and find a different date on that. Clemson will have its victory parade for its national championship coming up tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. rather. They will march through the streets of Clemson and also have their in-stadium, basically huge parade and gathering there at around 10:30 inside the stadium, and then the noon basketball game for Clemson hosting Virginia, looking for their first ACC win. It's part of a big slate of basketball on Saturday, which includes the Wofford Terriers going on the road to take on VMI, and we're pleased to be joined by their head coach Mike Young, coming off of a big 29-point victory last night over at UNC Greensboro. Mike Young joins us here on Sports Talk. Mike, Will Pelagic, Professor Tom Hayes, thanks so much for joining us from beautiful Virginia Military Academy. How are you guys?
Great, thanks. One of the real gems of a outpost in the Southern Conference here in Lexington, Virginia. Hope you guys are well.
We are well. Just give us a sense of where your team is right now. Obviously starting at SoCon play and off to the best start in program history in the conference. What has worked for your basketball team over here the first couple of games here, now 5-0 in league play, 13-4 overall?
Good players making basketball plays and unselfish. We've had an uptick here defensively, and we've had a young man emerge for us, sophomore out of Maryland, Kelly Aluma, that has been masterful on the glass. And with Cameron Jackson, who's having a heck of a year, and others, we're out rebounding. I think we're plus 10 for the year, maybe plus 12. I think we rank 5th in the country in rebounding, and that's all of them. And we played a bunch of good ones with South Carolina, North Carolina, Kansas, so on. Bottom line is, fellas, I've got a good team. And we're going to get better, but we are playing pretty darn well now. And last night was a good win. Need to follow that up with another good performance tomorrow against VMI.
I know when we talked before the season, Coach, we talked about your what I would call ambitious non-conference schedule, which even included a game that y'all didn't play at Stanford, but having to go to Oklahoma, having to host North Carolina, at South Carolina, which was a win for y'all, at Kansas, you mentioned earlier, and at Mississippi State. How much did that schedule help you for what has now become a league that seems like there are a lot of contenders?
We've talked about it quite a bit here, a little bit here in the last couple of days. Ambitious is a good way to describe it. Suicidal is another way to describe it. But if you can come through it with your head above water and hang in there, goodness gracious, what a callus you've developed on your backside. And, we've lost 4 games. We've lost 4 games against 4 teams in the top 25, 2 of which are top 10. We fought in all of those. We are right there, in all those going down the stretch, 10-minute mark, 9-minute mark. Wheels came off at Kansas. But once you get to league play, you think of the bodies that you've, defended and rebounded against. But this league is, I'm so impressed with, Furman, Greensboro, East Tennessee. Mercer came to our place last week and gave us a run for our money. Stanford is good. It's a very well coached league and is balanced. And I think maybe as good as I can remember, and that's saying a lot. I've been in that league a long time.
Well, tell me this, Coach, did you and Coach Ritchie get together and tell the Southern Conference that, this is a tough game we got to play and we need a week to prepare? It's kind of odd doing this basketball schedule. You two both, I think, have a week off after tomorrow to get ready to meet each other at your home digs.
I think that has everything to do with your travel partner. So Furman would be our travel partner. And prior to your game with a travel partner, you've got a week off. I'm not sure how all that works. You get to January, February, you want to play. They don't care much about practice, and I do. They don't. They want to play. But that's how it shakes out. And we'll need it. You play so many, games. It can be hard at times to, keep the saw sharp, if you will. And we'll have next week one to decompress and get our body squared away. But we'll also have ample time to, get some things squared away.
Of course, you mentioned the game next week against Furman. Before that, of course, though, as we mentioned before, you're in Lexington to take on the Keydets, who've struggled this year, 6-10, yet to get a win in SoCon play. How do you ensure that your group remains focused and on edge and not looking ahead to the in-state battle with you guys in Furman?
Well, yeah, I think you rely on your, the organization and your three seniors, and history is, we learn a lot of lessons from it. We had a game last Thursday against the Citadel, and we had a lot that went into it. The Citadel was playing very well, and we played very well and won going away. I think we won 25 or something. We've got Mercer coming back 48 hours later, and Mercer outplayed us in some areas. We did not play particularly well, and we couldn't put them away. Ended up winning by 4. I think that was an eye opener for this team. So we come off of a big win last night. Greensboro's 14-2 going into that thing, and we go up there and get after them pretty good. Well, you got to turn it around and get squared away and be prepared to fight again tomorrow against a team that, as you said it, it's the right word. They're desperate. They're desperate to win, and they're on their home floor. And the Cadets will be in here, and it's not an easy place to play. We'll have our hands full.
Coach, you've kind of let us know what you feel about your team. You say it's a good team. That means if they're playing Wofford basketball, your guys must be really adept at spacing and, of course, getting those all-important rebounds.
I just don't think there's any substitute with how we want to play. I've got to have guys that can shoot the ball, and that old big one is hard to come by. And I've got 3 of them. Young man from Charleston's doing a nice job for us, Matt Pegram. Cameron Jackson's the best post player in our league. Cameron Jackson can play anywhere in the country. Chavez Goodwin, from a young man from Columbia, Hammond, is doing a nice job for us. He had 10 rebounds last night, playing good basketball for us. But, we've got so many guys that can put that thing in a hole, and the spacing is essential, and we're getting better. We're getting better with it offensively, and really pleased with where we are defensively. All of our defensive numbers are very, very good at either 1 or 2 in our league through 5 league games. So, that certainly bodes well, but a lot to play here, and a lot to look forward to, I hope, and hope like heck we can all stay healthy.
Well, good luck tomorrow night against VMI, and don't mind us if we have our chops licked a little extra for what might happen a week from tomorrow with Jerry Richardson Indoor Stadium between you guys and Furman. We're looking very especially forward to that. Thanks so much for the time, Coach, and we appreciate it.
Okay, guys, have a good night.
That's Mike Young, head coach of the Wofford Terriers. Man, that is probably the biggest basketball game in our state this year between 2 in-state teams.
That's where you pay the fire marshal off and just let all the fans come in.
He looks the other way.
Sports Talk is the sports talk show of Main Street, South Carolina. From the coast to the mountains, we cover it all.
Couple of things we want to get to here, including recruiting and also your phone calls, 800-956-7266. Sports Talk continues, South Carolina Radio Network. This is a hard one to bring to the table here, guys. A Spartanburg High School student who was also a football and basketball player at Spartanburg High has unexpectedly passed away. Senior Nick Dixon basically was a linebacker, defensive lineman, and running back, and also a 2018 Shrine Bowler for the Sandlappers this year. Had several college offers, and he tragically passed away unexpectedly this afternoon during surgery, according to Spartanburg High principal Jeff Stevens. He said, "What an awesome young man. Gone too soon," and certainly our thoughts and prayers are with the Spartanburg High School community and family, and with the family of Mr. Dixon as he has passed away. Spartanburg was supposed to play Burns in basketball tonight. Those games have been postponed in order to mourn for Dixon's tragic and unfortunate loss of somebody who was gone way too soon. According to Spartanburg Vikings football, in a statement they posted on Twitter today, he excelled on and off the field and will be greatly missed by his family, friends, and his football family. He contributed in so many ways to football and the surrounding community. Unfortunately, Nick Dixon has passed away, and certainly, like I said again, our thoughts and prayers are with the folks in the Spartanburg High School community. Transitioning, as we have to unfortunately do and dutifully do, we do so with recruiting from South Carolina and Clemson's perspective. DJ Uwangalela, the big quarterback prospect, the 2020 prospect in the class of 2020, Clemson's next quarterback target, was at the national championship game on the sideline of Clemson's victory over Alabama. Had a chance to speak with him from our friend Phil Kornblut. He said, "I just wanted to see the teams play each other." He's been looking at both teams. It was the national championship game, a huge game. Wanted to be over there to see it. He said his uncle Drew had a connection up there at Santa Clara. We were basically on the field in the clubhouse suite. Also, he was there with his coach and his uncle and got to watch the game from down there, and got to watch the game right behind the Clemson bench. What was really sick was Clemson's manhandling of a team no one thought could be manhandled. It was crazy. To me, I didn't expect it. Knew it was going to be a good game, but didn't expect Clemson to roll over Alabama like that. Don't worry, DJ. Nobody did. Uwangalela is getting to the road possibly towards a decision. Clemson and Oregon have kind of separated from the rest, with the Tigers holding the lead spot, according to him. He says he still likes Clemson a lot. It's his top school right now, but he's still open. He's not sure when he'll make a decision. He really wants his mom to go up there and see Clemson. He said, "I know she likes Clemson a lot." His dad's been up there, loves it as well. He said he'll most likely come in for the spring game. Of course, you know, with the way things go with official visits, Dabo Swinney does not like official visits during the spring. He would probably have to wait until the fall to make that happen. He's also a baseball prospect as well, and has already transitioned to that sport for this spring. USC continuing to work hard in the state of Tennessee with 2020 defensive end Jay Hardy of Chattanooga. Offered him earlier in the week. We spoke to him, and he said that he liked how head coach Will Muschamp feels about him and his confidence. They say they like his hands and athleticism and would play him at end on regular downs and third down, possibly put them inside to go up against the guards. He said he loves what he's been doing. It means that he knows he get the places that he wants to go. His offer list is growing. Tennessee, Vandy, Georgia Tech, Kentucky, LSU, Northwestern, Indiana, and Duke are also on board. His brother played fullback at Tennessee, and he attended 3 games there earlier this season. He's also been to Vanderbilt, UTC, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, and Kentucky. USC has offered 2020 defensive back Tyrus Wheat of Copiah Lincoln Junior College of Mississippi. He is a native of Louisiana, had 65 tackles, 2 interceptions. He was a former Missouri commit. USC target cornerback DeQuantius Watts of Atlanta, offered by Texas Tech today, scheduled this weekend for an official visit with South Carolina. Clemson 2020 commit offensive lineman Walker Parks, offered by Tennessee, and 2020 wide receiver Braylon Johnson of Burns, offered by Virginia. His first offer for that in-state prospect of Burns. 2020 wide receiver Jalen Hyde of Dutch Fork was offered by Tennessee, and USC offered 2021 wide receiver Kobe Paysour of Kings Mountain, North Carolina, 79 catches, 1,650 yards, 27 touchdowns this year. 2020 point guard in basketball, Devion Smith of Loganville, Georgia, plans to visit Clemson Saturday, according to Rivals. He was at Bama last weekend. We talked about that yesterday with him being in town, not just for the game against Virginia, but for the parade. And 2020 6'9" forward P.J. Hall-of-Dorman plans to also be there Saturday for the Virginia game. He was at Florida last weekend for the USC game. He plans also to get a USC visit for a game this season. That is recruiting. Be sure to check it out on our website, SportsTalkSC.com, the recruiting podcast on SoundCloud, and also on Twitter. Use the hashtag STRecruiting. 800-956-7266 is the phone number. We head to Aiken when we check in with Mike. Mike is joining us on Sports Talk. Hello, Mike. How are you?
Hey, guys. Thanks for taking my call. Listen, Will, I've got a question for you and Pro, and I'd like to get your thoughts on the whole transfer issue. Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. With Fields and Hurts moving on from there, or possibly moving on from their respective schools, how long do you think it will be before the NCAA maybe caves to the pressure from these top schools about waiving the sitting out 1 year rule? And if they do that, how? Basically, that's my question. Will they do it? And if so, when? Because it's going to be, I think, pressure from these top schools. Hey, this guy wants to move. We want him. He can help us win a championship. That kind of a thing. And yeah, I think it's going that way. And how soon do you think that'll happen? Thanks for taking my phone call. Yeah, good night.
Appreciate it, Mike. Just to clarify what you asked and said, Justin Fields has already moved on to Ohio State. He's already moved in. He's there. Jalen Hurts, actually, today, I meant to mention this in recruiting, but he is currently right now on the University of Maryland's campus. He is at the Maryland game against, I believe, Indiana is who they're playing tonight. He is there they are playing Indiana. He's there right now with head coach Mike Loxley, the former Alabama offensive coordinator. From what I know and from what coaches have told us, legislation is somewhat on the table, or at least working to be on the table from folks inside college athletics about trying to get rid of that 1 year sit out rule. I know that's something that we've talked about, that still a lot of indecision about whether or not we want it to happen, because of the fact that it will basically create free agency in college athletics. But in my mind, I kind of look at this from the same way that Jay Billis looks at it. If the coaches are allowed to do this and go all free willy-nilly like this, why aren't the players?
Well, the most difficult thing to understand with people is because they always think of the advantage or disadvantage from the coach's fan standpoint. But I think sometimes a rule is in place to, let me put it this way. When I was an 18-year-old, a rule was in place to make sure to protect me.
Right.
And a lot of times, let's face it, guys and gals that age, they make a snap judgment because they think they need a change of scenery when all they need is patience. And sometimes, I think that year in between for a lot of players is good, because if they think that, okay, I have to sit out a year, maybe they hang on to why they made the decision in the first place to go to school A and then toughen it out, and then they may end up playing ball there. So I think just from my standpoint, when I look at the rule, sometimes it protects a young person from himself making a snap judgment that I need to move very quickly. That's the one thing I think about. The free agency, I could care less. I think it's just a protective mechanism for not having a young person make a snap judgment that they want to go to this team.
Here's the other part of this that I don't understand, or really understand why people don't want it, is because you have all these coaches. I mean, we are sitting here on the 11th day of January with coaches who still haven't, confirmed that they're going to be someplace,
right,
and, coaches that could possibly be moving on the carousel. We even have some who have signed to play with a certain school, and, Alabama's down like 4 assistants right now. Again, no one's necessarily coming out with any tears for them, but from the standpoint of where I sit, with such everything in flux right now in terms of the coaching carousel, you need to give people a way to reevaluate their decision-making if a situation changes. I almost feel like there's going to be a circumstantial waiving of that, and the coaching change situation will be a part of that. Also, there might be an academic requirement that needs to be taken into consideration, although some have said that that's necessarily something it's hard to enforce, and obviously something that almost is not necessarily fair to enforce. We'll continue to talk about that and bat that around. But first, we'll talk to Zach Lentz about his new book, The Journey to the Top, on Sports Talk. If you missed the announcement earlier, the President of the United States, despite all the stuff involving the government being partially shut down, will host the 2019 champion Clemson Tigers at the White House on Monday. Maybe I can go back home and get some lasagna for my mother to cover that. You think they'll let me in the White House? You think they'll do that?
Yeah, if you got your papers.
Yeah, we'll have to figure out a way to get inside the. That'd be pretty cool. Maybe Donald can stump Dabo with a word, since if I'm not there, maybe an absentia or something like that.
Yeah, I know what word you could.
Stop.
I'm not going.
Stop. I know where you're going.
No, it's
Stop.
actually 2 words. Oh, well,
stop it.
What about that drug?
No collusion. You've heard about the journey to the center of the earth. Well, we're going to talk about the journey to the top with a man who has written a book with the title as such, The Journey to the Top. Our friend Zach Lenz of the Times-Democrat covers the Clemson Tigers, is about as connected with the program as anybody, back to his time as a manager with the Clemson Hoops team, and he joins us now on Sports Talk to talk about the Tigers' historic march through the 2018 season. All right, Zachary, we've seen a lot of these books over the course of the last couple of years. What makes your book into this season unique?
Yeah, well, here's the thing about my book. And first I want to say, if your mom's cooking lasagna, I won't be with you. I mean, because I've heard stories about her lasagna. So
that's pretty good.
That's wrong with me.
Good.
Yeah. But no, my book is basically chronicling the entire season from start to beginning, through the preseason, the quarterback battle, game by game synopsis, and really just chronicling the season for the fans. So they have something they can maybe look back on in a few years, and go, wow, this team was special.
I haven't seen inside the book, but I have to think that a large part of your book is dedicated to that decision to switch from Kelly Bryant to Trevor Lawrence. And I don't want you to completely give it all away, give the milk away for free, so to speak. But I guess what were you able to uncover as a part of that decision, and how difficult it was for the staff?
Yeah, well, actually, an entire chapter of the book is devoted to that change and the decision that was made after week 4 of the season. And so, for me, it was really about diving into the reasoning behind it, how the team responded to it. Getting some inside information from some of the players and stuff like that, where they kind of opened up about their feelings about the decision and how it played out in their mind, how it played out in the locker room. And so that was a big chunk of the book right there, was that decision to make Trevor Lawrence a starting quarterback, which ultimately paid off pretty good for them in the national title game.
Was it difficult to, in your mind as you were writing the book, kind of discern how pivotal that was for them to sneak that game, to ease by Syracuse? Because you almost have the feeling if they don't get by Syracuse, they may not have been in the playoffs.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that, if they don't get by Syracuse, they're not in the playoffs. They're not hoisting that title trophy on Monday night. But, that was a pivotal part of the book. And really, it's amazing how things work out, when you're writing a book or you're covering a team where storylines kind of generate themselves, And the lead up to that game was the quarterback change. And then you have the game actually happen where Trevor Lawrence gets knocked out in the first half and Chase Bryce has to come in, completes a 4th and 6 pass on ultimately the game-winning drive there before Travis Etienne takes the ball in for the game-winning touchdown. I mean, you could have scripted a better storyline if you were writing a movie or a book. But, it was very pivotal. And I think the way it worked out, with the change happening that week prior to that game, and then the lead up to the game was all about Trevor Lawrence, how he was going to handle his first game as a starter. And really, he came out of that first game and was very shaky. If you remember, he wasn't connecting down the field like many people thought he would. He was having some troubles discerning the coverages that Syracuse was in. So there's a lot going on in that game. But that game right there was, I believe, at least, it was the turning point for the season for this team.
You can purchase it on Amazon. We'll tweet out a link after the segment is over on how to purchase The Journey to the Top, the Tigers' historic march through the 2018 season. Zach Lenz, our guest, joining us here on Sports Talk South Carolina Radio Network. Zach, so many stories to talk about with regards to this season. We talked obviously about the quarterback switch. How much of the book do you delve into the decision of the 4 defensive linemen and their decisions, at least 3 of them, to come back for another season for what they termed, at least to me in the locker room against Alabama last year, what was called unfinished business?
Yeah. Well, that's actually a large part of the book as well. The kind of the precursor to the season was all about those 4 defensive linemen, and whether or not they couldn't whether or not they would live up to the heights that they built for themselves. I mean, coming back the way they did, making the announcements the way they did. I mean, there was a lot of build up around this team, specifically the defensive line. So yeah, I actually spent a good bit of time talking about that. You know, the storylines behind that, how meaningful it was for them to come back, and really the unfinished business really was kind of resonating all the way through the Cotton Bowl. You know, when we were sitting in media days, and that phrase kept coming up, that we have unfinished business. It's why we're back. It's why we came back. So I think that's a big part to the storyline of this season. You know, the quarterback battle is going to get a lot of play just because of the popularity of Trevor Lawrence and the visibility of the quarterback position. But ultimately, I think the leadership those three defensive linemen showed coming back and taking ownership of this team, and really their leadership is really what carried them to the national title.
You know, Zach, the first time I was introduced to the phrase or the nomenclature sports and performance psychologist is when John Smoltz was pitching for the Braves when they were going great guns. Is it fair to say that when you observe Clemson and observe Dabo Swinney, that Dabo is his own sport and performance psychologist on the field?
Yeah, I think he really is. Yeah. I mean, you know, he's a master of manipulating guys to feel like they're the underdog. I mean, the whole Roy Bus thing, we give a good bit of the book to that, kind of following the Roy Bus along their journey. But yeah, I mean, that was one of the things I think he used to kind of keep his team focused and keep them on track and with the mission in mind that they had. And so, you know, I think he's a master psychologist. Absolutely. I think if you're a coach at this level, you have to either at least surround yourself with those people, or you've got to be one of them, and he is one of them.
Zach, what would you say is the most fascinating thing you learned in your research for this book?
The most fascinating thing I think I learned really was just how many different storylines there are to follow throughout the season. You know, covering a team, you kind of get pegged into one specific storyline for a week or a course of weeks where you're following one group of players or a player and kind of watching their development. But this book allowed me to kind of look at the team as a whole and follow the team as a whole. And so it gave me a better appreciation for the entirety and totality of the Clemson Tiger team. That it wasn't just one group that led them to the title game. It was a combination of defense, offense, special teams that ultimately provided them the opportunity to win the national title Monday night.
Well, one thing that you're doing with this book that I think is incredibly admirable and something that you've talked about on your Twitter is that you will decide to donate at least $1 of your royalty for every book sold to Dabo's All-In team. Of course, for those of you who don't know, Zach's wife has been diagnosed with incurable stage 4 breast cancer, and it's something that's impacted your life significantly, Zach. And I know that we've been following that journey and that fight over the course of the last couple of months and years. And we certainly wish the best to you and your family and your wife especially. And best success with this book. It really looks like something that every Clemson fan should have. And continued good wishes, my man. Appreciate it, and fantastic job.
Hey, thanks so much, buddy. I appreciate you, and I appreciate the ability to call you a friend, and you're a brother. So I appreciate you, and y'all take care.
Have a good evening. That's Zach Lentz joining us here on Sports Talk. And again, we will tweet out a link to where you can purchase the book, again, on Amazon and wherever books are sold. We'll come back and we will wrap things up, preview some of the basketball this weekend, at least what's left of it. No Gamecock basketball to talk about. And also talk a little bit about Clemson's game against Virginia coming up tomorrow at Little John Coliseum as Sports Talk continues on our Friday night here, South Carolina Radio Network.
Now back to Sports Talk, South Carolina's most listened to sports talk show for more than 30 years.
Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network. And again, I know I was a little flippant earlier about, Missouri leaving earlier and stuff like that. We're hearing a little bit more from my colleague Matt Michaels about kind of the forecast of what was supposed to be in Columbia, Missouri with their weather. Basically, the precipitation was supposed to be liquid until about a 4-hour window in the afternoon, about 1 to 5 o'clock Central Time, which would have been 2 to 6 o'clock Eastern Time this afternoon. And the liquid precipitation changed over to snow earlier than expected.
Oops.
So it's a lot harder to make those precipitation changes off the fly. And of course, from the standpoint of where they sit, it's a obviously situation and concern of safety, and it's led to the postponement of South Carolina's home contest against Missouri. We still don't know anything about when that will happen, if it will happen this weekend on Sunday or perhaps sooner. We will at least continue to make that happen. We will keep you abreast of whether or not that happens either this weekend or maybe Monday, something like that, if that can possibly be of the case.
Yeah. But the one thing I don't understand is the liquid to the snow, because
you can't fly in rain either.
It's my mind that if you want to take off, if it's light snow, that's safer than if it's liquid precipitation landing on that tarmac that's frozen.
Well, the thing about it is apparently there was a plane earlier today in Columbia, Missouri that ran off the runway, so they had already had some treacherous conditions to try and fly away. And again, maybe there was a situation where they, knowing what the forecast was to go into Thursday, we have somebody who tweeted us at SportsTalkSC. My nephew is in the U.S. Air Force, stationed outside of St. Louis in Belleville, Illinois. We're just over the border in Illinois, on the Illinois side. He said they were told to expect 10 to 12 inches of snow tomorrow, and he was sent early from work. That's 150 miles east of where they were in Columbia, Missouri. But again, we at least will await the word from both South Carolina, Missouri, as well as the SEC as they try to figure out whether or not they're going to play this game this weekend, later on in the season, or whatever. As we mentioned, still love the basketball in the state this weekend. Winthrop hosting High Point. Upstate is at Gardner-Webb. Coastal Carolina hosting Texas Arlington. Presbyterian at Radford. Western Carolina at Citadel. Charleston Southern at Longwood. College of Charleston hosting Delaware. Furman at UNC Greensboro. South Carolina State at Morgan State. Wofford at VMI. The USC women play Sunday at LSU. USC coming off a victory yesterday over Florida in blowout fashion.
Bludgeoning.
They started out on a 19-0 run. Man, they really have. It really has gone downhill at Florida women's basketball, hasn't it? It's very bad.
Yeah, it's tough. That's a complete rebuild. There's no doubt.
And they will try to go on the road at LSU. One thing that Dawn Staley said about the LSU women is that they're playing a lot faster than they have been in recent years. They currently sit right now on the season at 11-4, 2-1 in the conference. South Carolina, one of three unbeaten teams in the women's basketball Southeastern Conference slate. Missouri and Mississippi State, the other two. Of course, Mississippi State coming off of being in the national championship game a year ago against Notre Dame. So they're certainly still off to the same start. You had something there.
Well, just one thing that fans have to realize, and this is for both teams, what they took in those bludgeonings, playing that tough non-conference schedule.
8-4. That's not something they're used to.
You will see why they played that schedule now. They are ready for conference play. And what South Carolina ran through that gauntlet they had as far as the men are concerned, and how that kind of toughened, especially those freshmen up for what was to come in the conference.
Yeah, South Carolina played the requisite, again, tough schedule. They still have that game against UConn up in either Storrs or Hartford, wherever they're going to play that. That's going to be a very tough contest when they play them later on during the season. The Clemson men, speaking of tough schedule and tough slate, whoever made their ACC schedule must have had it in for them, because their start is treacherous at Duke, at Syracuse, and then home against the unbeaten and number 4 team in the country, Virginia Cavaliers. They played Virginia last year at the John Paul Jones Arena and didn't come close. That was one of the most lopsided games last year. That team, which plays incredible defense, we saw them earlier in the year against South Carolina. It just is completely a suffocating brand of basketball, and they can score at all 5 positions on the floor with each of their starters.
Yeah, and they've progressively gotten more athletic with their players. And that's a detriment, especially with their defensive length. I thought it was interesting when South Carolina played them that a couple of times the freshmen would be open from about 15 to 18 feet early in the shot clock, and they take that shot. And that's when Frank snatched them aside, screaming at them, "Don't you realize they're trying to entice you to shoot that shot early in the shot clock?" And so they play a psychological game with you as well as a physical game.
Well, the other part of Virginia's, and we talked about this when they were playing South Carolina, they run their offense through they use the entire 30. They want to limit the possessions of the opposition, and because of that, you mentioned the enticing you to shoot the 3. Well, it makes you feel like you have to almost score 4 points a possession, which is impossible to do. And because of that, you are baited into taking more ill-advised shots.
And what you were just saying is something that Virginia does, in that their players play like NBA players,
right?
Because they show no emotion when the shot clock is going down, as if, hey, we know what the shot clock is doing. We got our eye on it, and they'll wait till the 1 second to take that shot.
They're about as whole right now as they're going to be on Clemson's side. Marquise Reed is still, I guess, trying to figure out exactly how to play with that sprained MCL. He's looked, I would say, uneven. He looked very good against South Carolina, but since then he's had a bit of an uneven go of it. Scored highly against Lipscomb in the game after South Carolina, but had his struggles at Duke and then at Syracuse. I mean, I've said the same thing all year with them. They need to find a 4th scorer, and sometimes they don't even have a 3rd, and they didn't have a 3rd 2 nights ago against Syracuse. Only 2 players in double figures. They had 16 from Reed, and the only other guy in double figures was Elijah Thomas, who had 13 points, 7 rebounds. They're just not scoring enough points. I mean, I hate to make it so simplistic, but that's what their biggest problem is right now.
Well, again, we talked to Mike Young about spacing, and he was intimating that because he has so many guys that can shoot, they don't really have that problem with dragging spacing defensive players into the area where their shooters are, because all of them spread the floor. And you think that Clemson, for instance, a guy like Scara, does it seem to me that he tries to just be passive and just want to be one of the members of the band instead of being aggressive? Because I've seen him at times aggressive.
He's looked good at
times.
And
for a big man can drive the ball, and so I think he potentially could be a guy.
Well, I saw
that could be full score.
I saw one of his best games of the season against Radford, where he scored 16 points on just 6 of 9 shooting. He had 14 against South Carolina here in Columbia and 17 against Lipscomb. He has 9 points since then. Duke and Syracuse really limited him. And even a guy like Amir Sims. I mean, Amir Sims shot 1 of 11 at Cameron Indoor Stadium against Duke, and went 4 of 6, just 9 points against Syracuse. He's averaging 9.5. They wanted that to be closer to 12 to 13 to 14 points per game. And the fact that they have not gotten that out of him is a big reason. And again, we talked about the loss of Gabe DeVoe and how he has basically just been a very big missing part of what they want. They haven't seen the maturation from the freshmen like they've wanted to. Guys like John Newman III and even newcomers like Jonathan Baer, they have not been able to get enough out of those guys. Not Jonathan Baer, Javen White. They haven't gotten enough out of those guys in order to make themselves at least into a more cohesive unit and a more cohesive scoring unit.
Well, I've got to navigate through watching basketball, but I got to watch, and we don't talk about it enough, the NFL playoffs.
Yes.
No human has been able, or no human defense has been able to stop Patrick Mahomes. Maybe the snow does it. I don't know.
Could be some snow as well in the Boston area, too, for Chargers and Patriots. Hope you enjoy your weekend. We'll wrap it up for you all on Monday at 6. Corn will be back in the chair opposite of mine. For Professor Tom Hayes, producer Brian Leonard, I'm Will Pelagic saying so long, and thanks for listening to Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network. Have a good weekend.